Hi, Stefan the BMW DIY guy. The project today is from AvinUSA and their brand new Avant 3 going into an E39 540. The cool thing about this install is that not only will I do the backup camera, the forward-facing camera, and this brand new Android system from Avin, but also that it's compatible with DSP. Having a DSP system in your car used to be a deal breaker for aftermarket stereo systems because the moment you took the factory system out, your amp shut down and wouldn't turn back on again. You don't have that problem with the Avant 3, and so you get all of this new technology, get all the upgrades you get for streaming, navigation, everything else, and still can do it in a DSP car, which is absolutely fantastic. Really grateful for Avin for this project. Let's get out to the garage and get started. Okay, so I'm out in the car. Taking out the factory head unit or factory stereo is really quite simple. You're going to have one of two different setups here underneath the knob. So you just pull the knob straight off, and then you're going to have two things. You're going to have a small screw or a small flat screw head at the 12 o'clock position, or very likely a T10 Torx at the 6 o'clock position on the knob. There's a little locking tab here in the back that you're trying to turn. So what you'll do is, I've got a very long, narrow T10. So all you got to do is fit it in. And so in this car, it's at the 6 o'clock position. And so all you have to do is turn, and I turned counterclockwise and pull. And as you can see, the unit comes out at that point. So if you've got the one at the 10 o'clock position, the examples I've seen before are a flat-bladed screw, very small flat-bladed screwdriver. Same thing, turn counterclockwise or anti-clockwise and turn it, and then pull, and then this will come out, and then we can pull the rest out. But that part is really simple on how to take out. So just make sure you have the right tool. In this case, very narrow T10. All right, so I'm going to get these pieces out, and I'll show you what's next. So the next two pieces, so we need to remove the lower section and then remove this upper section. There's two T10s here underneath. I'm not going to rearrange the whole camera to show it because it's just super simple. You can see them, two very small holes right here. You take this section out by depressing the little locking tab that's right here on the clip and walking the horse collar forward. You walk the horse collar forward, and then this plug will come out, and then you can set this aside. And then you'll take your same T10 and come underneath here, loosen here, and loosen here. And then this upper part of your head unit can come out, and should come out nice and easily at this point. As you can see, it's now sliding forward. So I'll just make sure that these are loose, and then I'll show you how we take that cabling off. So this should just come right forward nice and easy. Now we're also going to remove this door as well when we go through this, but all pretty straightforward. So we'll slide this out, we'll pull the horse collar connections off the back, and then your head unit will be out. So I'll try to speak to some of the differences you may see. I can show you what I have, of course, but there'll be a couple of differences. So I loosened up those two T10s on each side, pulled the unit out. So now you can see your antenna connection on one side. This is easy, just simply depress the little clip, that'll come off and away. Now your main bus connection here, there's really kind of two different ways that this will work. One will be kind of a collar that slides down here from on top, and you'd pry that collar up. And it can be a little stiff to get that collar to pull up and away, and then for the plug to come off. The other style, like I have, is this little horseshoe type underneath. So there's a locking lever that closes down. So you're just going to pull up and pull away, and then you can see the plug comes out at that point. So your head unit is out, and you're all good to go. Now the other thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be removing all of the central frame. So I'll show how we remove this frame here moving forward, because we're going to have to put the new frame in for the new head unit, which will take this door and the rest of this frame out. Okay, so I've pulled the 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, but this is where things are going to get a little bit more complex, because this frame will not come out with this lower section in place. So I'm going to change where my camera is viewing to show you everything I'm doing, but this lower frame piece that goes all the way across is going to have to come off, or at least loosened. We don't have, we will have it loosened to the point where you could take it away entirely, which, you know, who knows, maybe if you wanted to replace this piece, you could do it at the same time. But you're going to have to pull this side trim piece here first. You can see mine is already loose. What I've done is I took my plastic trim tool and worked it up underneath and gently worked it up and away to pull it away. And you can see that there are 2 post spots, and these are mounted with posts underneath that hopefully you can see here and here. So take that, set it aside carefully. You know, if you wanted to change your interior trim, now's your chance to do it. because we need to get access to the screw that's back behind here. And there's a whole series of screws that we're going to need to pull and loosen. We're also going to have to lower the glove box. We're going to have to loosen this trim piece to get this frame out, because this frame will not come out, even though it's completely loose now, it will not come out with this piece in place. So get your trim piece underneath, loosen this so we can get to this screw. We're going to do the same on this side, and I'll pull this piece to show you the screws underneath that we have to pull here. We also have to lower the glove box to get to some additional screws on the other side, keeping this piece in place. It sounds more complex than it is. It's really not that hard. I'll show you what we're doing next. So we're on the passenger side of the car. I want to show you kind of very slowly what we're going to do. We're going to pull this cover. There's a very long screw underneath. We're going to pull that out. So pull this cover, pull this screw. You can see this is the clip holding the strap on for the glove box. You just pull this clip off, the strap will come off. There's a similar one on the other side, and then the glove box can just hang and be out of the way to give you access to the screws that are here that are underneath. You can also see with the trim piece off that there's a series of screws here as well that need to come off. So you need to pull all of these, you need to pull the screw on the other side, the screws underneath, then this piece will come loose. Now, when you pull your trim piece off, especially if you've got the wood trim, be very careful when you pull it off because it's very easy to crack. So don't do that. Now, if you notice behind, and I left it behind just to show, this is one of the posts that the wood trim sits on. This was in so securely that the post actually pulled away from the trim rather than pulling out of its little plug here. So I'm going to use a pair of pliers just to pull this out. But be really, really careful. I've also seen people use metal tools up underneath all of this. This is soft material. I'm a little uncomfortable using metal tools. I always use my plastic trim tools to pull this stuff off, and do it very, very carefully. The last thing I want to do is break it. So I'm going to pull all of these screws, and there's also a bolt underneath as well that I'm going to show. I want to pull all of those, and then I'll show you what I've done. As you look at all of this, make sure to not mix them up. So for example, this is a very, very long screw. Don't put that screw someplace else. So when you pull all these parts, make sure that you set them aside in a safe place and you know where you want them to be. So I'm going to pull those and I'll show you what I've done. So this piece is already partially off because I pulled all of the screws. But let me show you what I've done. So like I said, I pulled the cap cover here, pulled the long screw underneath. So now it's loose. There's a screw right here where you need to loosen your glove box like I mentioned. Pull both clips. They're these little flat clips that you need to pry open the centerpiece and then they'll slide off. There's two. There's one for each side. There's also a flat piece underneath your glove box, the trim piece. All you need to do is reach underneath when your glove box is closed, reach underneath, pull it down a little bit and pull it forward. That big piece will pull off, and now your glove box, once you pull the cloth strap on this side and the hydraulic post on the other side off, pull the clip off and pull the post off, your glove box will now lay down flat and you can get to the screw that's right here. Now, I've pulled all the screws here. There's two larger screws underneath here and here. Now this is loose. There's a cover that sits right there with two screws. 1, 2, pull both of those. Then this will now be loose. Now you might be able to do it without pulling that cover, but I did anyway just to be safe. And then I've slowly worked this piece out. As you can see, it's now loose enough that I can get to this frame by walking this forward, and the frame will come out. So now the frame is completely loose and out, and that's good to go. Now the other thing that I did, and as I try to move slowly, I've laid out all of my screws. This is the pattern that they came out of. The longer one, the shorter one on this side, the two big ones that were up here in the center, the ones that are across the middle underneath the trim, the two that were on that side underneath the cover, the far one that was on that far side. So I can make sure to put them all back in the right same place. Now, that center frame can come out and I can put my new frame in. So I'm going to do that next, and then I'm going to re-secure this piece. Now, what we're going to do next after that is I'm also going to be installing a forward-facing and backup camera in this car. So I'm not going to install the head unit, the Avant 3, until I've got all my cable runs done and everything else. So I'm going to show those next steps. Let me get this all buttoned back up. Let me get the new frame in and get this all buttoned back up, and I'll show you what I've done then, and then we're going to talk about cable runs. I wanted to show this frame a little bit more closely before I do anything else. So you can see this frame would have never come out without pulling this piece out because it's got this large upper flange here that sits back behind. So I mean, it's never going to come out just by sliding out. It's secured with all the rest of this in place. So now that this is loose, I was able to pull this piece out, work the frame back in, and get the frame up and out. So now the frame's out, which is great, and I can slide in the other frame. Now the other thing I wanted to point out is you've got these little metal clips, and there's an official term for it that I literally can never remember. They're little screw plates, they go on either side. It's what holds your screws when the screws come in. Make sure that all 4 of these stay in place. 1, 2, and there's 2 on the other side. Make sure that they stay there. I knocked one off. As you can see, this one's a little bit loose. I knocked this one off as I was pulling the frame out and almost dropped down at all that gap down below, but I was able to catch it. So make sure you don't drop yours. Now, we're gonna take the new frame and we're gonna slide it in right in the same place. It's gonna slide back and in. It will sit back behind just like the others did because it's got those same big upper flanges. So I'm going to get the new frame into place, and then I'm going to fit all of this trim back in, and I don't see any reason why to not put this all back together, with the exception of probably the glove box I'm going to leave hanging, because I still want to run all of my cabling, and I want to run those back behind the glove box. I'm going to leave the glove box hanging. So I'm going to get the new frame in. I'll show you once it's in. I'll show you with all this trim back in place, and then we'll start talking about what to do with the forward-facing and rear-facing or backup camera. Okay, so here we are at the trunk. So I'm going to start with the backup camera first, and it's going to replace one of the lights. I'm going to choose on the passenger side of the license plate, so it's going to replace this light. So there'll be a light there, it'll just be LED plus a camera. On my E46 where I did the same work, what I did was I replaced the light on the other side with an LED bulb, so they matched. Yeah, I like to have things match. So, because you've got an LED here, or you will have an LED here, and on the same and on the other side, so that way your license plate lights match. So we're going to pull that light, and then lifting the lid here, we've got to pull the liner. We're going to pull the trunk lid liner so we can get to the cabling and the light wiring behind. So what we're going to do is we're going to install the camera. Route the cabling, we're going to tap into the taillights. We're going to run down, we'll come down through this conduit here, back behind the carpet of the trunk, all the way down underneath the back seat, down the driver's side, underneath all the door sills, and all the way up to the new head unit, all the way up in the dash. So, but this is where we're going to start. So I'm going to pull that light, and I'm going to pull this liner. I'll show you what we do next. Okay, so I want to show what I've done here. So the liner's off. I'm just holding it up to kind of show that it comes off. So when you pull open your toolkit, there's this little strap. You take that and you turn it sideways, and you can pull it out of where it's attached to the metal, which would be right here, which needs to come down. The light, you push back and it'll twist and it'll come through the carpet. It's got a little pressure clip right here, which is very similar to the light over your license plate. You can see this is the bar for the emergency handle. You press the little tab back in the emergency handle, and then you can pull the bar out of the handle and feed it through the carpet. I pulled a screw that was in the grip on this side. There's a little cover. You pull the little cover off and you pull out the screw. There are 2 little plastic pressure pins where you pull the pin up here and here. Those come out. And then there's pressure clips over the rest, like for example here and here, which you can see one is left behind, which I'll speak to in just a moment, and so on. Now these little pressure clips, these are attached to carpet. So as you pull on this carpet, you've also pulled out the 4 screws here across the bottom, here, here, and here, little carpet covered screws. So when you pull these out, you can hear the carpet. I heard a little bit of kind of, scritchy noise where I'm putting a little too much tension on the carpet. So what you can do is you can get your plastic trim tool up and pull and pry against these clips to get them to come out of the metal, because the clip is strong, the metal and clip are stronger than the carpet, so you don't want to just yank on the carpet because you could potentially tear this carpet piece, and that would really suck. So I'm going to pull this other little plastic trim clip out, but now you can see all of this is exposed, and we can get to our wiring here underneath. We can get to what we need to get to because we're going to feed our cabling down, we're going to feed it down, feed it out through here, and so on. It's possible that you could have done this by just pulling this upper black plastic piece, by pulling these couple of screws and these couple of pressure clips and reaching through the carpet. It's certainly possible you could have done that, but in this case, I wanted to show the whole thing so to give yourself a little bit of room to work, especially as you feed the cabling down through the side. So I'm going to take out the light over the license plate, and I'll show you that next. So I've pulled the light for the license plate where the camera's going to go, and I actually changed my mind as I was taking a look at it. I realized the way the camera is angled, the camera's going to be on this side, that if I put it in this light, it would be better because it'd be more center to the back of the car than if it was on this side and on this side of the light. So I've pulled this light. Now, this was really stiff to get out. I've pulled a lot of these lights before, and this is probably one of the toughest to get out, even though the design is exactly the same. You can see that there's a little pressure clip on this side, so when it's in, you can see the notch in the frame. So when it's in, you're supposed to push over because it presses against that clip, and then it'll come out. The side will tip out. And it took a lot of force, a lot more force than what I would have liked to have applied to get it to press over and then come out. Part of it is that the cabling is on this side as well, which makes it, you know, you're pulling against the tension in the cable. So a little bit more difficult than I would have liked. Now, you can see your cable run here, and I'll see if I can get in close enough to see it. Now, in my case, I've got a gray with brown stripe and brown. So gray with brown stripe is going to be power, brown is going to be ground. So when you look at your camera, which I'm going to grab here, when you look at your camera, you'll see off your camera, you've got the video feed that comes out, and that's going to run off, and we're going to run it out through the car. And then you've got red and black. So red's going to go to gray with a brown tracer, black is going to go to brown. So I'm just going to clip this plug clean off, and then I'm going to just connect the camera, and then this will just snap into place. And it's very similar sort of pressure clip sort of process. Pressure clip on this side, so it's going to press in on this side and then snap up and in. There's also a gasket that you'll put around it so it'll seal well and won't weep water back in at all. So I'll put the gasket on. But it's going to be a matter of getting this into place and getting the cable feed out through the hole in the frame, which I've actually got some sunshine, which is actually kind of nice here because sometimes my lighting lately has been a little rough. But you'll see that there's a hole right here where the rest of your wiring comes out. This is where that's going to go. Now, you could always tap back further if you wanted to. You could always tap the power for your light here back a little bit further. You can make that choice on where you'd like to put it. And then we're going to route the cabling, the rest of the video cabling, all the way down through the frame and all the way down through this side out through this rubber grommet. Now, and then we're going to do our best to try to snake it through that feed. Now, I will say I've had mixed success. I've had a couple of occasions where I've been able to feed the cable through this really cleanly, which is what's preferred. Then it seals back in and is really, really nice. I had one case on an E46 putting in a backup camera where for the life of me I could not get the cable fished through here, and I ended up running it on the outside and zip tying it down, and I did a pretty good clean job and never had any leakage or anything else like that. So this will be a little bit of a challenge. We'll get to that. I'm going to install the camera. I'll show you where I install all my wiring. And we'll keep going so we can get the rest of this cable run done. So the camera's in place, though I'm going to leave the little film cover over the lens for now because I'm no doubt going to touch it and do different sort of stuff. So I put the gasket around the camera body, or around the light body on both sides, removed the adhesive on both sides and just pressed it back into place. Seems to fit just fine. So then I've run my cables through the access port hole, and you can see the video connection cable here and the power cable here. I've also pulled the run for the light all the way back to here. I wanted to tap it in here, so pull it so I've got more room to work with and I can secure it nicely. So I'm going to tap in there. Now I'll scroll down here, or pan down as it were. Like I said, so I've pulled the rubber grommet here and I've pulled it here. Now, the one thing that the E39 has different than, say, for example, the E46 is this rubber grommet doesn't fully extend all the way back in like this one does. You can see that extends all the way back and extends underneath. Now, I've pulled my carpet. To do so, you'll have to pull the back floorboard carpet. You pull that up. Once you see that, there'll be a series of little pressure clips, those little black pin pressure clips where you pull the center of the pin up, then you can pull the whole clip out. 1, 2, 3 here, you pull those. You can pull the side piece down, pull the handle down, and then there's 1 and 2 on the inside, and then this whole piece will come out. For the side carpet here, there's another one of those black pressure pins that sits right up here. Once that's out, you pull it up to get it up and over the little cargo hook right there, and it'll peel up and away. And you can see where our cable run is going to be. You can see the master cable run back through up there, but you can see our challenge. Our challenge is right here, and this is where the other end of that rubber grommet is. So it may be not possible for me to fish the new cable all the way through that. Now, I'm going to try, and I recommend that you try. You might have a means or a tool or a way that I don't. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to fish it with a string first to see that I can get a string all the way through, and then pull the new video cable up all the way through. Because what you're going to need to do is take the video cable that's going to run all the way up to the front and run it up through here first. Get it up through, all the way up and over to connect to the other. So I'm going to try to fish it. If it doesn't work, I'm going to do like I did on the E46, right? I'm going to bring it down to here. I'll put it on the bottom edge of this grommet. It'll be on the outside. I'll zip tie it to all of this. I'll feed it through the bottom of this side. I'll put it in on the bottom of this side, because on the top, you figure water would enter from the top and drip down. On the bottom, it's dripping past it. So if there was any seal problem, it would drip past. And then I'll feed it down through this hole. So I'm going to give that a shot. If I do succeed in fishing, I'll tell you how I do it. And if not, I'll show you how I secure it to the outside. Out here on a little bit of sun on a Pacific Northwest day. So this is the power connection for the light in the new camera. I've cut the plug off of the original power run. We've got gray with a brown racer or gray with a brown stripe. That's gone to power. And these are called, I believe, called butt connections. I usually call them any number of different things. But I've used just connectors. I snipped the plug off, connected here. Brown is ground, and I've put that to black off of the camera. So I've run the camera wire, the video feed wire, up here across the top of the frame. You can see where I've connected, where I've run the cabling up through the hinge, and I've connected here. I've used a little bit of electrical tape on this connection to make sure that it stays solid. I've hooked over here. I've got enough slack in my cable that it can give a little bit of play when I put the carpet back on. I've zip tied here. I'll cut this off. I've zip tied here. I'll cut this off and fished down to get to here. Now, like I mentioned before, I actually came the other direction. I came up through the bottom, up through here, up and up through here. Now, as you can see, I've got the cables running on the outside. I was unable to fish it through this. The connection bends a number of times, and it is really, really tight. So these upper grommets, upper and lower grommets, actually fit really, really well. They've got big tabs at the top on the either ends. They lock in really super tight. So I come out the side, and like I said, I've done this before on an E46 and didn't have any problems. So I came out the side here. I made sure that this popped in really, really solidly. I've raised and lowered the trunk a couple of times to make sure that I've got the correct amount of slack. You want exactly the right amount of cable length so it doesn't pull when it's up. And I will zip tie this down to this, and let me move slowly so you can see here as well. I've got it coming out the side along the bottom because I want water to go down, not up. I don't want it up on the upside, I want it on the downside. So I'll zip tie this in really nice, neat, and clean. You could also use something like electrical tape or something similar. I find it's not a big deal and fits in well. So here's where I want to show what I've done next. So I'll pan down slowly. Now, here is the power and ground for the camera, or for the camera feed itself. Now this is a little bit more of a challenge because of cable length, right? So normally, like say for example on an E46 where the lights are actually up in the tail, this run just has to go to the lights that are in the lifted tailgate, and it's not a problem. In this case, in a 5 Series, your lights are all the way down here in the tail right here, and I want to tap the power and ground off your backup light because that acts like a trigger. So when your backup light goes on, it applies power to the camera, which acts like a trigger. It turns the system on. The system knows that it's backing up because of power being applied to the circuit. So I'm going to move very slowly so you can see this. What I've done is taken the light. This is the light for the backup light. That plugs in this whole wiring assembly, or excuse me, light assembly plugs in right here. So your backup light are pins 3 and 4. 1 is at the top, 1, 2, 3. So 3 is the brown or ground. 4 is the black with the green stripe or green racer. So that is your backup light. What I've done is I've traced it back through this wiring loom or wiring harness all the way back, and I've released some of the ties so I could get a little bit more room to move. I traced it back, traced it back, traced it back, all the way up to a place where I can find those same 2 runs up higher in the loom, which is up here, and as you can see, I've pulled them out to show them. These are the ground and power for your backup light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to tap into those lines right there. So red will go to black with the green stripe. Black will go to the brown. So I'll use those same butt connectors. I'll snip these 2 wires here and here. I'll put, 2 on one side connection, have this one come up on this side connect. Same thing on the ground. So before I snip those, I wanted to show you what I did on how to get them, and then I can tie this all back together. There's also a little bit of this sticky kind of cloth tape that they use for wiring harnesses wrapped down here, around here. I peeled a little bit of it back, just as little as possible to get by, but I really wanted to make sure that I got the correct 2 wires, and I traced them all the way down. Because what I did was I found where they connected here, got a little bit of, I found them, pulled them out, and as you can still see, it's right here. So pulled it out, found it, pulled it out, found it, found it, all the way up until I get up to here. And this is a convenient place for me to connect these 2 wires in. So once those are in, the camera will have power and ground, and then we'll take the rest of this run. The video run is also coming down right here, and it will feed up and back, and we'll feed back, and we'll feed it back underneath the back seat, down the door sill, and all of that. At the far end of that connection is your video, which is here, and this will connect into video in on the wiring harness on the back of the Avant 3, and this is your trigger wire right here that will tell it to trigger and turn on. So we're going to feed all that next, so I'm going to make those connections next. I'll show them briefly, and I'll show how I'm starting to feed the wire. This is just, it's not hard work, it's just work that needs to be done very carefully to find the right thing. It really isn't that hard, just got to be careful. And you have to have a little bit of prep work first, because you got to have, like, say for example, the right electrical connectors. And let me pan back up. I'm using what are called butt connectors, which are these guys right here. There's many, many different ways you can make these connections. So if you've got a better way, I definitely encourage you to do it. I find this works for me and shouldn't be a problem. So like I said, I want on the other end, so when I'm making those connections, that lower harness for the backup light, I'll have 2 wires coming in on one side, I'll connect it, I'll have the other wire coming on the other, and we'll be good to go. So I'm gonna make that connection, and I'm gonna start to route the cabling, and I'll show you when I've routed it all the way up to the center console. So I'm gonna walk slowly and show you what I've done. Play by play, just makes sense, and I'll explain it. There was no need to show. Top cable here. So as you can see, the black video cable is coming down. I gave it enough slack to be able to hit that existing tie right there. There's a tie right there, and it's going through the main port where the power cables are, and there's a big black rubber grommet that go around those. Pull the grommet out, ran the cable through, fit the grommet back in. So let me move slowly. So I removed the back seat. If you're not familiar on how to remove the back seat, it's super simple. You just take it, you grab the seat base, pop up, and it just lifts up and out. I took the center headrest off as well, as you can see right there, and I've raised the passenger side headrest on this side so I could lift this. Now, this is the seat back, and I wanted to leave it in an open position so you can see what I've done. There's a 10mm nut right here at the bottom. You take this 10mm nut off, you then can pull this out a little bit. With the headrest up, you then grab the bottom and pop it up a little bit, and it'll pop free of the clips. There's a clip on all the way across the back, all the way across. You could take the entire seat back out. I don't see a point in doing so when you can do this in about 30 seconds and you're good to go. So all I've done is to give myself enough gap to be able to get in here. Hopefully you can see. Here's the main power runs that come up from the back. Here's my video cable. I've fed it through the grommet, fit the grommet back in. Now I fed it down the same track that everything else goes. So under this piece, and then under all of the door sills all the way up. So as we move up, ran that video cable up through, underneath all the door sills, all the way up here, all the way up underneath this corner trim piece right here, around up right here, and then my glove box is closed because I was making sure that the cable wasn't in the way. And then I ran the cable up and behind the glove box. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, and I'll try to show it here, is back in the back you'll see there's the hinge, this back hinge for the glove box. So when you run this cabling, forgive me, my camera will focus. There we go. So the camera will show, or hopefully show, the cable. I actually you run behind the hinge. The hinges come down on either side. If you run the cable in front of the hinge, when you close the glove box, you'll pinch the cable. Don't do that. Okay? So get that, fish up behind the hinges, all the way up through the gap right there, up through the gap, all the way out through the center of your dash, which is still open from the previous work we did, and there it is. All right, so that's the cable run right there, all the way up. Now, the other thing is when you pull this all the way out, you want to make sure you've got the double connection exposed. Now, I do, because here's the other end. So this will be for the forward-facing camera that I'm going to install next, and I'm going to install that up behind the mirror, looking forward, and run it down the headliner and down the A-pillar, and then the same path behind the glove box up and through to connect here. I'll show that next. I apologize if my camera's out of focus a little bit there for a little bit, but you can see the path I took. The dorsal trims you can lift with your plastic trim tool just underneath the edge enough to get a gap to run the cable. You can use your fingers and then run it all the way around. The big thing is getting it behind this glove box assembly far enough and behind the hinges so they don't get pinched, and up through the gap right there, and you should be good to go. So I'll show the forward-facing camera next, because then all the video will tie in together. Then we'll get the new Avant 3 installed, and we're making progress. Okay, so you can see I've mounted the camera there. I've gone ahead and pulled the film off the lens part of the camera just because it might be a little difficult to get to afterwards. So I've mounted the camera there, and I've run the cabling under the edge of the headliner. So I used my plastic trim tool, got on it, got a little bit of gap in the headliner, and then fed the cable in, and I fed it to here down to the A-pillar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it around this curve, and then underneath the cover, underneath the seal, all the way down, so I can get all the way down into the gap for the glove box. So I'm going to make all of that run, connect it in and tie it in with the rest of the cabling, tie it in, and then connect it to my double feed coming in from the back. And we should be good to go on all the cameras. So I'll show you that when I'm done. So I decided to reroute my cables a little bit, and I wanted to show you what I did. So obviously I'm running the backup camera, and I've got the forward-facing camera, and they join. The join is right here, where you've got to take the run from the back camera and the run from the front camera. They join right here. So what I've done was, I've routed everything down the A-pillar, underneath the connection here, or underneath the seal right here, tucked it in really nice and neatly and cleanly all the way down, back, tucked it into the gap here, pushed it back in with my plastic trim tool, and then I loosened this piece again, because instead of kind of going the long way around underneath, I realized that if I loosened this piece again, I could run it directly behind this piece. Now make sure not to foul the screw on this side, so it's tucked back behind, and then there's a nice little shelf that runs all the way to the length and runs out that side. So I ran all my cabling through there instead especially for this upper camera, so it'd be nice and clean. So then I'll button this back up. All I had to do is take, half a dozen screws back out again, loosen it up a little bit, and it makes the cable routing a lot cleaner than what it was before. So I'm going to push this all back together, and then I've got all my connections up here all set and good to go for the camera. Now we can take the head unit and start to tuck that in. So back in the driver's seat of the car, I've taken this opportunity to put everything back together that could be. I really want to make sure that when I do my work, I don't set things aside for a while and be like, well, wait, where did that screw go again? So back in the trunk, I've put all the liners back in. I've put all of the cover on the trunk lid back on. All of those things are back in together in the way it should be. I zip tied down the cables on the run between the trunk and the body to make sure that those are in a good place and are tied up really nicely. You can tell the trim's back in. I've put the glove box back on. I've put this lower plate or the side plate that was back on. All of those things are back together to make sure that I don't end up later wondering where I've left some screws, or I have maybe even trouble remembering how I took something apart. So even with the video, sometimes it's good to do things in order so you can understand of the order of how you took things apart. So now we get to the fun part, if it wasn't so far. You get to put in the head unit. Now, the plug on the back of your stereo may look a couple of different ways. There's kind of a pin style and a big post style. This is the pin style. You can tell there's no question in what the two different kinds are. You can tell the post styles are a bunch of big barrels kind of posts. So get the correct adapter for your car. It's usually, both will be included. You just get the right one that fits yours, and you can see how it fits. It fits on really nice, neat, and cleanly, like that. And then you just lock this horse collar in place, and it's good to go. So then you've got the adapter at the other end that's going to plug into the back of the Avant 3. So you just plug this in right there, and your main wiring harness is done. You've got your antenna here, and this will plug into the back of the Avant. And now you start to deal with some cable management. And I'm a big believer in really, really clean cable management. Now, the one other thing that I want to make sure to point out, just because I haven't mentioned it, because I haven't done it yet. We've got our 4 screws, right? So we've put our new frame in. Our new frame is in, but not secure yet. So you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 screws. So I'll put those 4 in a moment. I didn't want to forget about them because I've still got them sitting right here, speaking of screws. And I've also obviously pushed the center controls out to make sure that I've got a little more space to deal with cable management. Now, you've got a bunch of antennas to hang, so you want to make sure that you get good places for that. You've got a GPS antenna, and you have 3 other antennas that are all going to go for 4G and wireless and all your cellular connections. So these can go really wherever you want to put them. I've never had a problem with GPS reception personally. I do know that there's some folks that have. So some folks that have put their antenna back here underneath, underneath the dash, and end up with some reception problems. And usually means you've got slow GPS resolution, that sort of thing. If you really want, you could even mount your GPS antenna up here behind your mirror and run the cable down your headliner, down the A-pillar, just like we did on the other side for the forward-facing camera, and do that if you really want to have full exposure. I definitely know some folks who have done that. I've never had a reception problem, so I'm going to go ahead and keep it on the underside of the dash. Now, I can reach all the way in and hit the underside of the dash right here, and that's where I'm going to put it. Now, on the other side, I've also got open space as well where I can get, so they only have the thin surface of the top of your dash, which is where I'm going to put the rest of those antennas. So all the antennas are the same. The GPS antenna is by itself, and then all of the other antennas are the same, and it doesn't matter which one you plug into the back of the Avant. So you need to get all those hung, and there's adhesive, you peel that off. I'm going to put all of my antennas over here and my GPS antenna over here, and then you also look at all of your other cabling that you've got that came along with your system. All of these are going to plug into the back of the Avant, and some of these you may not want to plug in. I mean, if you don't ever have plans on plugging in, video out, other things like that, you may skip it. Now, in my case, I'm going to plug in everything because I want all the USB ports I can get. So I'm going to use that. There's also the dedicated USB port as well, which goes into one very specific plug, and we're going to use that as well. You've got your SIM card reader, and as you look at all of the plugs, and I'll show this on the back of the Avant, all of the plugs only go into one place. So it may seem a little complicated. It may seem like, a spaghetti mess full of cabling. It is a little bit, but once you start plugging things in, you'll see where everything goes. Now, the other thing you can do is you can also find your cable connectivity that you're going to use for your cameras as well. Now, the one thing that I'm not going to do is you have your mic connection here. So I'm not going to plug it in. I'm not a big fan of it, candidly. If I was going to do it, I would run the cable down the A-pillar up through the headliner, and I would put it up in the center, up where basically the OEM mic would be, and hide it up in there. It's not a functionality that's important to me, so I'm actually not going to do it. But if you use it, because there's voice commands, with the cellular connectivity through your DAC, you can actually have, it's got its own number, so you could actually be making phone calls straight with the DAC. To do that, you want to have the mic plugged in. Hang it where you want to hang it. I saw one person who actually put the mic just in front of their steering wheel column. You definitely could do that as well. It's really a matter of personal preference. So as I go through all this, I just want to call out that's the one thing I'm not going to plug in is the microphone and hang that. So, all right, so I'm going to grab the Avant. I'm going to get it all plugged in. And then I'll show you how it all fits back into this space. So the one thing I also want to touch on while I'm thinking about it is the connection for the backup camera. So the backup camera has this like RCA style plug. The connection you're looking for is the one that says CCD in. There's a lot of other options, video out, all kinds of other similar connections, but it's CCD in. That's the one that your backup camera will connect to. You also have what is the trigger wire off that same cable run right here. That's going to connect to the line that's marked reverse on the primary harness. So that is where you're going to want to connect that in. Now, if you have, these are like little spade connections. I don't have the spade connector that would fit here. So if you bought the correct size spade, you could just stick it on here and plug it in and you'd be good to go. I'm not going to do that. So I'm gonna cut the spade connector off, and I'm going to use one of my little butt connectors here, like I did in the back. But this is where you'd make that connection. So make sure to not neglect that while you do everything else that you plug in. So I'm going to connect this. I'll show it. Then I'm going to show all the connections in the back of the Avant 3, in addition to hanging all of my antenna, which I'll do next. So I'm going to get that all done, and then I'll show you the net result. Okay, so we're looking at the back of the Avant 3, and you can see all of your connectors. So really, when it comes down to it, there really are only one place for pretty much everything to go. The CAN bus goes here. Your antenna connections are all marked: GPS, Wi-Fi, 4G, 4+. The only one that really matters here is getting the GPS in the right place, because the GPS antenna is different. All the other three can go interchangeably in any of the three. And the rest of the plugs are all pretty much only go in one place. So if the plug fits, you're good to go. Your antenna will go here. There's a dedicated USB port up here. Now what I tend to do is with the dedicated USB cable, this guy, I tend to use this for the bus connection, because there's a USB connection that comes off of the bus or off of the new extension connection, that primary cable harness that you need to use. So I tend to use this dedicated USB port directly for that, just because I think, you know, for basic important functionality like that, I want to make sure that it's not tied in any of the other connections. That's just my choice. So you'll get everything all plugged in. Good cable management matters. So my antennas are up here and here now. All of the extra cabling is all twist tied together, so it'll stay relatively neat and clean. And now it's just a matter of just plugging it all in and then sliding it back into place. Now when it goes into place, you've got 4 screws that it will screw into, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it will secure down, and you'll be good to go as far as the mounting. These little screws are 2.5 millimeter screws. The smallest I can find as far as length was 12 millimeters, which is probably a bit too long. But they still work. They just don't have to be that long. But these are 2.5 millimeter screws. So if you lose any of these or need any extras, they're 2.5 millimeter. I can get them at my local hardware store. Hopefully you can too. All right, so I'm going to get this all plugged in. I'm going to make sure that everything is all routed correctly, and then I'll show you the net result when we're done. Okay, so here we are all plugged in. So I've got the CAN bus in, I've got all my antennas in, I've got all my adapters and connectors all plugged in. Again, I made sure that the USB plug that's coming off the adapter harness is plugged into this dedicated USB. Don't forget your antenna. It's easy, this wire tends to be a little short, so it's easy to lose it, to forget about it with everything else, and suddenly you're wondering why you don't have radio reception. Your primary bus plugs in here, your CAN bus plugs in here at the bottom. And at this point, all your wiring is pretty much in. Now, I'm going to keep my central controls out, because when I fit this back in, I'm going to reverse this around and fit it back into place. I want to be able to reach underneath if I need to pull any cables down. Now, there should be a lot of extra void space back behind this unit, but this will help get it all into place and get good cable management and all set up. Now, you've got a bunch of USB ports that you can route. There is an SD card reader on the front. There's your USB ports. So for example, if you have the DVD drive, which in several other models, E46, E53, I've routed and I've put the DVD drive in the glove box, and so I've routed one of the USB cables to the glove box. I'm not going to do that in this case because I don't have the drive with this. I don't really feel the need in this particular car. There is an SD card slot on the front of the Avant 3. If you look on the rows of buttons on the right hand side, that last button on the bottom actually isn't a button, it's a cover for the SD slot. So if you did want to put music or whatever on an SD card, you can do it that way. Or you can route your USB ports, so you can put in a USB stick, you can put in like I said, the DVD drive and other things. So now I'm going to flip this around, get all my cables managed really, really well, pulled back, and I'm going to get this into place. And then I've got my 4 2.5mm screws that I'm going to put in to mount this before we put that final frame cover around the outside. So I'm going to get this mounted into place. I'll show you where the screws are, and then we're about ready to test this. Okay, so the deck is in and it's secured. 1, 2, 3, 4. I used 3mm screws in this case. They're machine screws. They're 3mm by 6mm. I said 2.5mm earlier. I actually thought that this frame used the same size screws as the E53, but in this case it's actually slightly different. So they're 3mm screws. So the deck is in. The other thing, before you secure it, make sure all of your cabling is good. I actually noticed when I was doing final fitment that one of my USB connections for my cameras had worked itself loose. So I made sure that that was reconnected really well. I checked all of my other connections so you don't, have any problems where once you've powered up, you have issues. So let's go ahead and start the deck. Now there's a couple of things you're going to want to do. You'll see the startup cycle here. One of the very first things you want to do when you first power up your deck is go into the iBus app and register or unlock your car. So when it boots up, it goes straight to Wi-Fi or cellular, depending on whatever your connection is going to be. Make sure to get that set up. You can go into your setup and get your Wi-Fi set up. As soon as that is done, and this is the main home UI, where you can see all your different icons. So once that's set up, go to the dots here are what take you to the Android apps. You can see the BMW iBus app. Click on that. Select the correct car, in this case the E39. Hit the little dots up in the corner and say unlock. When you hit unlock, it'll go out, it'll check that this application is good to go on the internet, it checks against your VIN, it'll unlock your car, and then all of these connections will work. So at this point, the deck is in and it's working. The last thing you want to do is install this frame that goes around the outside. The frame is really, really stiff. I've had to take it off before once in the E53, and it's got little locking tabs in it, and it's really stiff. So I was really careful about not breaking it when I took it off. So you want to make sure that putting the frame on is the very last thing you do. That everything else is secure. I've checked my backup camera, it works. I've checked my forward-facing camera, it works as well. And so at this point, it's all done. I will be doing a feature review in the future, but as far as installation, we have our forward-facing, our backup camera, which works. The deck is all in. I've got good connectivity as far as radio, cellular, GPS. There's even a GPS test app already included, so you can see all of your different antennas. I'm sitting here in my garage with the door down, so I can see 5 GPS satellites at the moment. All of that works really, really well. I've also, if you go to Maps or Nav, I've noticed that GPS resolution is quick, which is great. So no issues there at all. So we should all be good to go. If you have any questions, definitely ask, and I'll do last little bit of cleanup, get my frame on, and we'll be done. All right, so back in from the garage after all the testing and everything's all set up and ready to go. What a really cool project to do. So a couple of things to refresh as we go through this. Number one, those little bolts that you use to secure the display into, or the Avant 3 into the frame, are 3mm. I got 3mm by 6. They work really, really well, and you need 4 of them. In addition, if you were installing the backup camera like I did, make sure that you trace the correct wire. Now, ultimately what I did to make sure that I had the right wire, I actually pulled the 4 10mm nuts off of that rear light assembly and pulled it off to make sure that I could match which pins in the plug that went into that assembly were the ones that actually went to the backup light directly. Now, in my case, those were pins 3 and 4. 4 being brown and ground, 3 being black with a green racer stripe on it. Now, double check on yours. It may be different, but absolutely check. And then once you get the right wiring pair, track it back up through the wiring harness there on the right side of the trunk till you get up to a point where you can meet it with the power and ground that comes down from the camera. It's really not that hard, just really make sure that you have the right wire. Now what I did is once I found especially that black with the green racer stripe, is I literally tracked it back through the loom. I'm like, okay, it comes out here, bends here, and like found the wire all the way through to make sure that I eventually found the correct wire. If you grab the wrong one, or sometimes you can even have, depending on the size of the wiring loom, you can even have wires that are the same. So you could have another black with green or something similar, but it goes somewhere else. So just be really careful when you do that. Now, usually it has that kind of fuzzy, sticky cloth wrap around the wiring loom. If you need to unwind that, you can. Just use zip ties and zip it back together, every few inches, and you'll be fine. So, all in all, what a great upgrade for this car. This E39 had DSP, so this Avant 3 works with that. The install itself really isn't that hard. I've checked GPS reception, it looks great. Radio and cellular reception is great. I'm really pleased and looking forward to working with this system and really sitting down and doing a lot of work on all of the advantages that the system brings. Also, the iBus app that's included, which allows you to get around the DSP, has a lot of additional functionality if you really drill into it, where you can program the lighting in your car, you can change if you have fold-in mirrors, all of those sort of things. You actually have that ability through the iBus app that's installed on the DAC. All in all, really not a hard project. Probably take you maybe an hour to 2 hours out in your garage, especially if you're following along nice, neatly, and slowly. It might even take a little bit less. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer them if I can. If you liked what you've seen, please click subscribe. Click on like and subscribe below, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.